In less than 2 weeks, we have Purim. So I thought it would be very appropriate, obviously, to speak about Purim and to try to give an understanding of some of the essential information that you have to have. You know, in order to appreciate a holiday, you need to understand the holiday itself. You need to understand the holiday, which means that you need to understand the essential idea. Now, what we understand is that events just don't happen. There's no such thing as an event that just happens. It is orchestrated by the Ribbono Shel Olam to happen because it's critical to bring a tikkun, a rectification to the bria, to the creation, and therefore there is a spiritual necessity that this has to have some type of tikkun. And the way it happens, is generally through a primary tikkun event. And that is the formula that is true of all holidays. So the challenge really, when you think about it, is that if that's the case, if the primary tikkun event, the event itself, is there in order to bring about a necessary tikkun, rectification, right, of creation, then the question really, of course, becomes, what is the tikkun that is brought about by each of the holidays? Unfortunately, most people focus on the holiday, which is okay, but what they focus on is the superficial understanding of what the holiday signifies. But really, the tikkun event is much deeper than the holiday. And that is a mistake that people make. You know, for instance, take one, let's take Hanukkah. So people focus on the concept of Hanukkah as liberty, freedom from tyranny, which is true. There's no question that is what Hanukkah stands for, in the sense that it happened, but that's not really the tikkun event. Actually, before I continue, this year should be a blessing and a merit for the health and success of the families of Regina Bas Yosef Reuven and Yeshaya ben Yisrael, Benjamin Wolf, ben Tzvi Hirsch, and Baruch ben Benjamin Wolf, and Shmuel Reuven ben Regina should have a refuah shalema.
Esther Lieber.
Oh, and also Esther Lieber Bas Chaya Yafa should have a refuah shalema. Shlomo Leib Ben Fega should have a refuah shalema. In any case, so we see that there are really 3 levels of understanding in a holiday. One, what is the actual event that occurred, the actual historical event? What is it? Number 2, what can we glean from this event in terms of the tikkun process, at least on a simple level? And then there's number 3, what can we glean from the event at a much deeper level of the tikkun itself, vis-a-vis the entire tikkun that has to take place in the entire program. So there are many levels of understanding of a holiday. And the greatest ability to adhere or to celebrate a holiday is when you know these ideas. Many people are left with the superficial understanding of the holiday, and as a result of that, they never really get enthusiastic about the holiday, except in very physical terms. But that's not really what's supposed to be. What it's supposed to be is an understanding of the essential idea of the holiday and how it contributes to the tikkun itself of creation. And that will also, by the way, tell you the meaning of the halachas. Because the halachas must mirror the tikkun process of that holiday. You see, it's not merely Chazal thinking, well, this is nice to have as a, as an outgrowth of the holiday. No. The halachas themselves enable a person who observes the holiday, if he observes the halachas, to actually reinforce or continue the tikkun itself of that holiday. And therefore, that's what gives the logic to all the halachas. And what it really does is also explains the reason for the halachas and why it is so, you see. In any case, so that's a general understanding of what to look for in any Yom Tov. Since Purim is next week, so I want to go into Purim and try to understand, what the holiday signifies. What is the essence of the holiday? Well, we know what the holiday is. We know that there was a king of Persia, Ahasuerus, that had a grand vizier, Haman. And that Haman connived, together with Ahasuerus, to destroy all the Jews in his kingdom. And since Ahasuerus was the king, basically, of the entire world, therefore, if he would decide to do that, which he did, he could destroy all the Jews in one fell swoop. In fact, Chazal tell us that this was the last time that all the Jews were under the sovereignty of one nation. After Purim, you could no longer destroy all the Jews because they were spread out throughout the entire world. In any case, so the question that we have to start off with is, what exactly is the essence of Purim? Besides the event that Haman and Ahasuerus wanted to kill the Jews, and of course God saved the Jews, obviously. Not only did he save the Jews, but he had the perpetrator of the desire to kill all the Jews, he had him killed. Haman died, which was shocking, because we're not looking at the death of an official. We're looking at the death of the Grand Vizier himself. That's like the Vice President. In fact, it's even more powerful than the Vice President, and so on. So God did that. So we're looking at incredible salvation, like I said, of not only were the Jews saved from destruction and obliteration, but Haman himself was destroyed and his entire family. And not only that, the Jews realized a tremendous aliyah, ascent in power and recognition in the kingdom of Persia. So look at all the different things that happened that God caused. First, they were threatened by Haman and Ahasuerus, right? Then Haman dies, he and his entire family, right? And then the Jews occupy a tremendous position of status in the Persian Empire. What a salvation, right? we of course will experience that in the Messianic era, this, where the Jews have terrible mazel, and then all of a sudden, the people who cause us such terrible travails, they will be wiped out. And then the world will recognize the Jews as the greatest nation of all. And that, of course, since it's Messianic, will go on forever. The Jews will never occupy an inferior status. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, one, what is the essence of Purim? Why was there a Purim? You see, because remember, everything in the end is orchestrated by God. So why would God bring about the potential annihilation and obliteration of the Jewish people? Okay. And the answer to that, Chazal tell us, interesting, that Achashverosh, we know, because that's how the Megillah starts off, with a tremendous seuda, or meal of celebration that Achashverosh made, and the Jews participated in that. And of course that was not right for different reasons, and so on, it was not right. And one of the things that Chazal say is that the reason for the meal or celebration was that Achashverosh, by his calculations, realized that there is no redemption of the Jews at all from his of their being subjugated to him, because the 70 years that Yirmiyahu said that the Jewish people would be in exile ended and they were not saved. So Achashverosh celebrated that, right, with this tremendous meal. And by the way, they brought out the vessels of the Beis Hamikdash. But I don't want to get into that. And the Rabbi Hashem decided, and I will try to explain, that the Jews have to die, all of them, for this trespass. Of course, one of the questions is why? Okay, the Jews made a terrible mistake. They joined Achashverosh at the Seuda. That's true. But why should they have to, all of them, die because of that? Even if what they did was wrong, because they joined Achashverosh in celebrating the fact that the redemption had not occurred. Right? So how can you join Achashverosh in that when we always look forward to the redemption? But in any case, why would God seek a decree to annihilate the Jews? Anyway, that's one of the questions. What is the essence of Purim? Because Purim was really the salvation. A second question I would ask is, why is it a holiday? History is replete with attempts to annihilate the Jews. And we know that. It's not just the Holocaust, it's the Crusades, the Inquisition, and so on. So many things have happened, whether it be locally or nationally, to destroy the Jews. Even the Romans tried to destroy the Jews. So the question is, why did Chazal make the event of Purim a holiday? And we can further ask, how do they know when to make something a holiday and when not to? What's their formula? Okay. Then we have, of course, certain some of the halachas, mishloach manos, which means you should give a gift of two things to your friend, or your neighbor, whatever, to your fellow Jew, mishloach manos and so on. The question is why? Okay, it's nice to give a gift, especially of food, to your fellow Jew. Yeah, but why do you have to give mishloach manos? Just to be nice to the guy? What does that have to do with Purim? And the same thing is matanos le'avyonim. you want to give gifts, money, to Evyonim, which is poor people, right? What does that have to do with salvation by the hands of Haman? And then there are other things going on. There's mitzvah that you're supposed to get drunk, adelo yoda, until you don't know the difference between the statement of Baruch Mordechai, blessed is Mordechai, and Ora Haman. Okay, I mean, you want to drink to that, but why is that a mitzvah, to get drunk to such an extent where you can't distinguish between the two? That is the question, you see. And then we have the custom of costumes. Everybody gets dressed up and so on. Why does that occur? What does that have to really do with Purim and so on, where the salvation of the Jews from Haman occurred? Anyway, there are many questions that we can ask. I choose just to ask this so far. Anyway, so how do we begin to understand Purim? Like I said, every event that culminates in a holiday, right, is because it's involved in addressing a spiritual necessity. And therefore the event occurs in order to address that spiritual necessity. And that event can either bring it about, the tikkun, the success of the tikkun, or it could fail, you see. In any case, that is the question. So Purim really is very interesting in terms of why it happened. Chazal tell us that at the time of Matan Torah, the Jews were supposed to accept the Torah, right, with love, with a tremendous joy and simcha. That would have been an incredible mitzvah. Instead, Chazal bring down and say that God ripped House Sinai off its base and put it over the heads of the Jews and said, if you accept my Torah, that's fine. But if not, I'm going to drop the mountain on top of your heads. And obviously all of you will be crushed under the mountain. That's what the Rebbeinu Shalom did. Kofulim harkagigis. So the question, of course, is, wait a minute, why would the Rebbeinu Shalom do that? Why would he want them to be compelled? You see. And the main question is, you want to do harkagigis, but we know that the Jews accepted the Torah with love, because it says Na'aseh v'nishma, right? Whatever Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will understand. So that was a superlative acceptance of the Torah. So why are you telling me that the Jews basically refused to accept the Torah? And God had to threaten them, right, with putting Mount Sinai on top of their heads to potentially kill them all. And Tosfos deals with that question, and he answers something very interesting. He says that the Jews accepted the Torah, right, the Torah itself, and therefore they accepted it as Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do and we will understand. So they accepted it with joy and total acceptance, and so on. But when God offered the Torah Sheba'al Peh, which is the oral law, the Jews said, no, we don't want it, you see. So God therefore took the mountain, ripped it off its base, and threatened them with extinction, right, if they don't accept the oral law. So this business with the mountain threatening them refers to their rejection of the oral law, you see. The question that we really, in many ways, have to ask ourselves is, why? Why did the Jews reject the oral law? Because that's clearly what they did. And God forced them to accept the oral law, you see. First of all, why can't Goyim say, well, why didn't you force us to take the Torah, right? And the answer is obvious, because the Jews had accepted the Torah, the written Torah, but they had rejected the oral one. So God said, therefore, I can force you to take the second part of the Torah, which is the oral law. But the Goyim rejected the written law also. So God said, that means you don't want the Torah altogether, and therefore I'm not even going to offer you, even under compulsion of the oral law. Fine. But the real question that we have to ask ourselves is why? What we do see is something very interesting. The Jews created at the time of Matan Torah, which is the giving of the Torah, a pagam, a defect in the Kabbalah, right? They were supposed to accept the Torah with love, and that would have brought tremendous, what's called tikkun, rectification, tremendous light of the spheres down to the earth and so on. That's what it would have done. So by rejecting the oral law and being compelled to accept it, that created a pagam, a defect in the tikkun of the bria, in the rectification of creation itself. Bad news. So it comes out that even though they were forced to accept it, which of course they did, and they observe it, it's not the same. They observe it being compelled. So that's a pagam, a defect, a flaw in the actual plan of creation. Well, if that's the case, then guess what? That has to be addressed, right? It has to be rectified, right? That means the Jews down the line have to accept the Torah out of love, not out of fear. You see, therefore what God did is he created an event that would correct that flaw. Right, we now have found the spiritual problem, and therefore the necessity that Klal Yisrael has to accept the oral law with love. You see, so we now understand that this defect or flaw in the tikkun process must be addressed. So what God did is very interesting. He created a situation, right, that would allow the Jews to accept the oral law with love, thereby bringing a tremendous light to the creation itself, enlightenment to the creation itself. In other words, it would be a tikkun of Kabbalah's Torah. It would actually rectify the defect that the Jews created by not accepting the oral law. You see. Now, the question that we have to ask is, well, correct them, and God is now going to initiate a new historical event in order to get the Jews to accept the oral law with love. Why did they reject it in the first place? You see, because clearly the nature of the historical event that God is going to use as a correcting device has to reflect the original reason of why they rejected it in the first place. Right? Wouldn't you agree with that? So therefore we need to ask ourselves, why? Why did they reject the oral law? You see, what was the understanding that the Jews had that made them do this? And here's what I'd like to tell you, which is a very important idea. Jews said to themselves, so to speak, I can understand the written law, but it's not so much the written law. The Judaism consists of two things, what's called Ben Odom L'Mokum and Ben Odom Chaveroi. There are halachas or mitzvahs between man and God, and there are mitzvahs between man and man. That's the basic, one of the major basic divisions that categorize the mitzvahs. So the Jews said to themselves, wait a minute, I can understand why God wants to issue laws, right, of ben adam l'makom, between man and God, because that's really what the tikkun is. The laws that talk about Shabbos, for instance, or tefillin and kashrus and so on, those are laws between man and God. What's their purpose? Is because we listen to God, right? I'm being very superficial. Therefore, that is part of the tikkun. So I can understand that there are laws between man and God, because that's what the tikkun is all about, to transform this physical world into a spiritual world called the future world. All right, I can understand that. But if you notice, there's a great deal of laws, even in the written law, obviously, and certainly amplified by the oral law, that are not bein adam l'makom. It's bein adam chaveroi. For instance, you can't steal. All the laws of inheritance, for instance, all the laws of courts, right? And the laws of shomrim, which are, guardians and so on, all the laws of loans. There is filled with laws. But if you notice, these laws are secular, in the sense that these are laws that Goyim also have. In fact, what does a society want to do ultimately? Man could live alone, each one living on his own. But mankind has decided that they can best preserve their existence, right? How? By living in what's called societies, right? Where one guy will produce something that you need, and you produce something that guy needs, and then there's an exchange. No person can fulfill all his needs, and so on. So therefore, what we realize is that all societies, to preserve themselves, have laws that preserve the society, or else it doesn't go anywhere, right? One of the fundamental laws is property. I can have property. And you can't walk into my house and decide to take it over, right? And what about marriage? Guys living with a woman that he wants to have, a house with kids and so on. You can't walk in and say, by the way, I'm taking your wife. There has to be laws that allow society to preserve itself. You see, so what the Jews thought is the following. I can understand why God wants bein adam l'makom. All the laws that preserve or, talk about doing mitzvahs for the sake of the tikkun, transformation of reality and so on, for God, getting closer to God. But why do I need laws that all societies have anyway? Why does that have to be a law in the Torah? Because once it becomes a law in the Torah, it's an entirely different dimension, right? You see, then it becomes what's called spiritual. Yeah, but thou shalt not steal. If you look at the 10 Commandments, you can't murder, you can't kill, right? You can't steal, etc. Those have been adam chaveroi. Why do I need that as part of the religion? I should just have it as what? Part of society. So if that's the case, why do I have to make up laws altogether? Any society that will have a society must have laws that preserve that society. So why can't we make up those laws? Or if we go to other nations to live, we'll abide by the laws of that nation, because they also want to preserve their society, right? So why don't I just live according to their laws? That's the whole point of it all, right? And if I want to live by itself, which we did for many, 1,000 years, whatever, and so on, obviously you're going to make up laws. It's one thing, well, you should put on film, or you should observe Shabbos, or kashrus, or you should observe the holidays. Fine, I'm not going to invent these laws, right? God has to tell me these laws and so on, But everything else, of course, we're going to make. We're not going to rely on the Rabbi Shalom telling us the laws. You mean if the Rabbi Shalom never gave the Torah, and then Klal Yisrael leaves Egypt, and they go to Eretz Yisrael, they're not going to have laws which are basically for the preservation of society? Of course they are. Without the Torah being given, obviously. So what they thought to themselves is, why do we need to be encumbered, you see, by all these laws that of course we're going to make up on our own? Why does it have to be God-given? Why isn't it man-given? Because, like I say, it's necessary for the preservation of how we decided to live, which is social. Very powerful question. Because remember, they were going to do it anyway. So why does the Moshe have to do it? Why does it have to become part of the religion? You see, that's the question. So that's why they said, we don't want that. It's not that we don't want the oral law, because a lot of the oral law is an explanation of the written law. So you can't reject that. It's part of the written law. It's part of the explanation, right? Like, for instance, it says, and you will slaughter the way I've taught you. What do you mean taught me? Where? And the answer is the laws of Shechita. So of course I have to know how. I have to know what's forbidden on Shabbos. So they didn't reject that, because that's nothing more than an explanation of the law, of the religious law. But what about all the halachas, what's called the halachas of Even Ho'ezer, the laws of being married and so on, right? What about all the laws of Choshen Mishpat, which is the civil law, all the courts, right, and the civil law and so on, laws of tort and so on. Of course we have to have, even Goyim have those laws, you see? So that was the issue, why they didn't want the law. Makes sense, if you think about it, you see. Anyway, and the question is, that's why the Jews did it. So God looked at the Jewish people at that time, and he said, listen, I know what's in your heart. Your heart is to believe in me, to love me, to serve me, right? That's in your heart. And I know that if you understood what the rationale, why I want to institute those laws, social laws and so on, you would do it. Your problem is you don't understand what I'm talking about, right? So I have to show you, not merely tell you. I need to demonstrate the necessity of why I am issuing those laws. You see, that's a whole different understanding of what God is saying. So God says, okay, someday I will create an event where you will see what I'm talking about. And what God was really saying is that there are three types of laws. And this is what you need to understand. You think the laws are just to preserve society. Fine, right? And therefore a law will become legal. Legal means not that it's just. There's legal, then there's justice, and then there's righteousness. There are three levels of laws, and they not only apply to mitzvahs bein odom l'mokum, between man and God, they apply between man and man, right? This is what you need to learn, that when Goyim make laws, or man makes laws, okay, it's legal, which means that we all agree that this is a law, and we all have to abide by that. And in addition, it can be enforceable in a court of law. That's all legal means. But does legal really mean that it's justice? That this is really what should happen? According to the concept of reciprocity and so on? Of course not. You know how many laws in the United States, certainly laws in other countries of the world, that are legal, but they're crazy. We know that, right? Many times you go to a court there, you're being sued, and you look at the people and say, are you out of your box? You crazy? This is a law? There are many laws that are absurd. You see, but they're all legal, but they're not just. Just is the second level, right? Righteousness is the third. Righteousness is much greater than justice, because justice adheres to a principle, right, called perfect reciprocity. You did A, guess what? It's not B that will happen. It's the opposite of A that will happen to you. You see, that's called midah keneged midah. That's justice. Righteousness, right, it's not only just, but it's righteous, which is a much higher order of rationale. And because it's righteous, it will create tikkun. That's the critical idea. I want laws, God is saying, that will not only preserve your society, I want laws that will transform the physical universe into a spiritual universe. Therefore, the law has to be not just legal, even justice is not enough. It has to be righteous. And then it becomes part of the tikkun process. You see, now it's true that we don't understand the righteousness, the tzidkus, right? But we see that in the Torah when it says, tzedek, tzedek, tirdoif. Tzedek doesn't mean you will pursue legality. No. You see? And tzedek doesn't really mean and you will pursue, justice. Tzedek is tzidkus. It's righteousness that you have to pursue. And it's true, we don't understand what is righteous. We will be informed at a later date. But God wants the laws that you observe to preserve society not for that purpose. He wants it as a tikkun to rectify, to transform creation itself. You see? And if that's the case, then I have to give it, because I know what's righteous. You don't. Not only that, you will learn someday, because that's what the Jewish people thought. Well, why can't we make up the laws? Anyway, we have to do it to preserve our society. And not only that, any nation we go into, of course, is going to have laws. Or how do they exist? They recognize that. 4,000 years ago, you had a famous code of Hammurabi. Hammurabi made a code of laws, right? Why? Because he had to preserve the society that he was in. And you had the Assyrians, you had all these people, they had laws. We may not like them because many of the laws were ridiculous, or they were unjust, or they catered to a specific party, right? Self-interest of parties, right? But by and large, they have to have some form of justice, because that's the logical idea, you see? And so on, So this is a very important idea. What God's criteria is much greater than ours. It's legality. No. It's justice. No. It's righteousness. And then it's able to transform the bria, the creation, right, into an olam haba. So you can't make those laws. And even if you go by goyim, right, those laws are not necessarily justice. They're legal, that's true, because we have all agreed to abide by them. But what do they have to do with justice? And we all know laws, many laws, that are ridiculous, and so on. And I don't even have to give examples, because all of us have experienced absurdities in the legal system and so on, In any case, without belaboring the point, you see the difference. But the Jews did not understand that. They said, anyway, we have to make up the laws to preserve our society. Of course, we're going to have a law, thou shalt not steal, and so on. I don't know if I would give that, if the Arabs would make that law, because a lot of them steal and so on, and whatever. And then there are people who like to murder. That's what they live on and so on, without going to examining societies. But that's what the Jews said. So we don't want it. So God said you need to take it. Once you've accepted the transformation of reality based on my mitzvahs, then you need to understand my mitzvahs, bein adam l'chaveroi, right, is not for society. It's not for justice. It's much more than that. It's righteousness, and that is spiritual. That's it. But how are the Jews going to learn that? So that's what God said, and only He could do this. He says, I will create an event where you will see that I'm right. Oh, why? What's the interesting part about that? Well, I'll tell you. How did He do it? So therefore, God creates an event that will demonstrate this fundamental flaw in the laws of society. Right? So what happens? It all starts off with the meal, the Suda, that Achashverosh is celebrating, right? Because of that the redemption will not occur, that the prophecy of Jeremiah is annulled. Why are the Jews doing that? They didn't believe in this. The Jews didn't believe that Achashverosh was right. They didn't agree with him, thank God, the Messiah is not coming. Of course not. They went into the celebration for what reason? For the meal. It was an incredible celebration. He had the best caterers around, all right? And not only that, they went into network. Why else does a guy go to a Goyisha celebration? Because business, he wants to network with people. And also the great food, hopefully it's kosher. And we know that he gave kosher food, you see? So what the Moshe said is, what are you doing? This concept of celebration is all flawed. Ah, that's what you do? Because the Jews are they labor under the false idea that what the Goyim do is okay. It has nothing to do with righteousness or justice. It has to do with business. You see, it's all to serve man and to preserve society. So God said, this will wipe out the Jewish people. Why? Because if this is what you believe, then when you go into the exile, right, you're going to adopt the laws of the society you're in, which are Goyim. But that's very bad. That means you will assimilate because you believe that what they've done is correct. It may not be spiritual, but it's fine. We're okay living under the laws of the Goyim. So automatically you will have removed a major barrier to assimilation by believing in what they did is okay. No good. You will assimilate, and that will be the end of the Jews. You see? So God decided, I got to do it now. I have to show you your error. And that's why it all started from the meal itself. Because that's where the flaw really was exacerbated of what the Jews think of the laws of Goyim. So what did God do? Takes Haman and he raises him to be the Grand Vizier. What happens? Well, Haman hates the Jews, without getting into that. He hates the Jews. So what does he do? Because he sees them as, well, I don't want to get into why he wanted to do it, but because it's not simple. Why he wanted to kill all the Jews, because when you think about it, it makes no sense. But maybe, I don't know if I have a time to go give that shir. Whatever. In any case, so Haman goes over to Achashverosh and he says, let's make a deal. I want to wipe out the children of Israel. I want to kill them all. So Achashverosh looks at him and says, what are you talking about? What do you mean you want to kill them all? They all pay tax and I need money. And hopefully the Jews were very successful in business throughout Persia, right? So why would I kill them? So Haman comes up with this idea. Well, they're really separate. They don't really abide by the laws of the king, So what Achashverosh should really have said to him, which he didn't, which itself is very interesting, he says, what are you talking about? I'm the king of 127 different provinces. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of different cultures and languages and scripts. So everybody's different. So why should I kill the Jews? In what way are they different, more different than everybody else? So you should have said to Haman, you're out of your box. Because I have 127 different nations. So what are you talking about? And then the Megillah starts off with 127 Medinas. That means each one had its own laws, its own culture, right? Its own language, its own script. Come on. But Achashverosh never did that without getting into why and so on. So him and Haman sit down and make the deal, right? And of course I'm going to give you 10,000 talents of silver, which is a fortune in those days, obviously. And Haman gives, Achashverosh gives Haman the ring. Okay. All of a sudden Mordechai becomes aware of it because of Ruach HaKodesh or whatever. Or they issue a decree because they want to kill the Jews. Obviously, that means not that they're going to send the army. They want all the people of Persia to kill the Jews. You see. So what happens? The Jews, what was their reaction? It wasn't fear initially. It was shock. Wait a minute, are you crazy? We are law-abiding citizens, right? We are tax-paying people. We do everything that Persia wants. So why do you want to kill us? What happened to your laws that are supposed to be legal? Or we thought they were just, right? Because every nation has its reasons why it makes laws. But basically, it has to be just. What happened to the justice? What do you want to kill us? Because Achashverosh got him 10,000 talents of silver? What kind of treachery is this? So the Jews are shocked because they realized that Persian society, all society that makes up the laws of social preservation is bankrupt. That's what they realized, that when it suits them, they follow the laws. But if they can get away from the law because of their self-interest, of course they'll dump the law. You see? Because society is only interested in preservation. They're not interested in justice, righteousness. That's a different language. You see? That's what the Jews realized. Very important idea. It was the ultimate treachery of this deal between Achashverosh and Haman and the Persian society. It was people that were going to kill the Jews, not Haman or Achashverosh. I mean, maybe he was going to send in his military. But basically, it was they killed the citizens of Persia. But why? You know, we get along fine, and the law forbids it. A lot of money to be made here. And whatever their cheshbon was. In any case, the main idea I'm trying to promote is they realized the value of the legal system of societies. And then they said to themselves, the difference between Torah and the laws of society is night and day. That's what they realized. That the laws of Torah are not just legal. They're not even just only. Of course they're just, but really they're righteous. And of course we need God to make those laws because we don't know what the criteria is. That's what they realized. What God did was amazing. He created an event that brought the Jews to their senses, that showed them if you walk over to a guy and change his interest, he will kill you. Even though there's a law on the books that says, lo yisirtzach, don't murder, right? And so on. Because when they realize they can get away with it and profit, they will do it. I mean, there's so many instances in the history of this, you know. Like the Holocaust. Of course he killed all the people because he realized he can get away with it and make money by extracting their teeth, gold from their teeth, and make a fortune, you know. It's just astounding what this man did, and so on. What do you mean? There are laws that Germany made. Who cares? We'll change the law. Why? Because our self-interest is to get rid of the Jews. For whatever reason motivated them. With Hitler was because he believed the Jews were treachery, and with the German people, they hated the Jews because they looked at Jews and they were probably very jealous of the Jews and so on. Or the arrogance, they want to be the Aryan race. Without going into the self-interest of the Germans, they changed the laws. And this is the lesson God wanted Jews to understand. How do we see this? Where do we see this in the Megillah? Right? We see that because it says, La Yehudim ha'yisa'ira v'simcha. And to the Jews there was enlightenment and happiness. You see, what it should have said is La Yehudim ha'yisa relief. There was relief that they were not going to get killed. You see, once they killed all the Persians that wanted to kill them, it should have just said, and to the Jews, there was relief, right? And therefore joy. What's this oira? Enlightenment. What enlightenment? This has nothing to do with enlightenment. This has to do with salvation. You see? So it should have said, La Yehudim ha'yisa Yeshua, salvation. But it doesn't. It says enlightenment. What was the enlightenment? What I am telling you. Because the whole event was set up to teach the Jews this enlightenment. What is the value and the nature of laws by Goyim, or really laws by mankind? Don't expect more. And God was successful. And therefore, what was the culmination of this? Right? Kimu v'kiblu. It says in the Megillah, Kimu, they fulfilled, Kiblu, what they accepted long before. So the Gemara uses that in Darshans, expounds and says, Kimu, they accepted, right? Masha Kiblu, what they accepted long ago. They accepted the oral law, but under compulsion. But they now, Kimu, fulfilled it with love. Because they now understood the depth of Choshen Mishpat and Even Ha'ezer, right? That this is part of the mitzvahs to bring you to Olam Haba, right? Now this story is incredible. It makes sense what was going on. You see, and that's the reason for Purim. Now, once the Jews did that, what did the rabbis say? Well, if that's the case, we realize one thing. The Jews realize one thing, that we are not protected at all by Goyim with their laws. It means nothing. They can have all the laws in the books, they'll still kill us. They'll alter the laws when it addresses their self-needs or their self-interests. So what are we talking about? That we have to be for ourselves. We are here alone, really. And everything else can easily descend into betrayal and treachery. So Chazal said, if that's the case, we want to foster, we want to intensify the achdus of the Jewish people to themselves. Oh, and now we understand what's going on. So what they wanted to do was create an atmosphere of love and unity of the Jewish people to themselves, right? So what's one of the best ways to do that? You go over to your friend, you give him a gift. And everybody loves food, right? So you give him food, right? When you give a gift to a friend, guess what? Somehow you have a feeling of endearment. Wow, he must like me, he must value me, or why is he giving me the gift? So what that does is it arouses tremendous feelings of achdus, of unity, right? That's mishloach manos. And obviously poverty is also, you give a guy a gift of money to try to take him out of what? Out of poverty. It's also unity, where you foster a tremendous amount of love, you see? Mm-hmm. And this is what we realize. Now it all makes sense. of why the Rebbe Shem did this. It was to teach the Jews what? The idea. Now, once the Rebbe Shem decided to do that, right? He could have done it in many ways, right? And what the Rebbe Shem was doing until Purim was he was bringing salvation to the Jews, right? Openly, miracles, and so on. But this was no longer the case. He brought salvation to the Jews, behester, concealed. You see, that's the way he brought salvation. Now, you say, really? Yes, and I want to show you by going through certain different aspects of the event how none of this could have happened in real life. The story of Purim is a story that almost looks like a fantasy, right? And it's hard to believe that it happened, right, at all, because we say chance could never have done this. Let's take a look. And you'll see, this story could never have happened if not for the fact that God did it, but he did it underneath behester, right? Let's take a look at some of the ideas, okay? First idea, Achashverosh. Achashverosh was not privy to royalty. It was Vashti that was the granddaughter, I think, of Belshazzar, and so on. That was his claim to fame, because he was married to Vashti. He himself was, I think, just a general, and he became the king of Persia and so on, you know. But in any case, so think about this. Did you ever hear of a king saying that his wife has to be completely exposed to the general public, to all the visiting guests? What are you, crazy? Not only is it undignified to do that, right? But you destroy any respect of this woman. She's the queen. So how could you do this? Are you crazy? Kings don't do that. Yet that's what's exactly what Achashverosh did. And I don't care if he was drunk. It doesn't make a difference. You know, they never get drunk where they don't realize, what they're doing. And that's what he did. But that event is ridiculous. You see, not only that, but his whole legitimacy of the crown was what? His legitimacy of the crown was through her. If she was dead, he's no longer king, because the royalty passes through her, not through him. You see, so that's a double motive why he shouldn't be doing this, yet he did it. What are the odds? I don't believe there are odds. I've never heard of that, where a guy would do that, a king would do that to his queen. It just makes sense. It boggles the mind. You know, what is this guy, some kind of an animal? You see? And so on. So that's the first idea, you see. Okay. Second idea, okay, Haman. He's now looking for advice, right? So what the Russian wanted is the death of Vashti, because she was a very cruel woman, right? So he elevated, or rather, here's the seventh minister, or whatever he was, gives advice to the king. And they all buy into it, which is unusual, that they all agreed to his advice. And what was his advice? Kill her. Because not only did she sin against the king, she sinned against all the Persians, you see, So kill her. You have any idea what kind of advice that is? Kill the queen. Nobody does that, So you say, okay, we'll put her in prison for a month or two, or I won't buy her all the fur coats. Whatever you would do to punish a queen, fine. But you don't kill the woman. You have her apologize. You see? Whatever. So the fact that he gives this crazy kind of advice, because I want to tell you something. It's only a matter of time until he regrets what he did, which is what he did. Of course he regretted what he did. She was obviously whatever to his eyes, a very good queen, and she was royalty, real royalty, So of course he's going to regret. Well, if he regrets, guess what's going to happen to Haman? Haman is in danger, because Haman is the one who came up with this crazy advice, right? And Achashverosh doesn't sound like a very forgiving person, So Haman is actually advising the king to do something that is endangering Haman's life. How stupid can you be? Whatever. He should have demanded an apology from Vashti or whatever other way to solve the problem. But he had to kill her? Anyway, so that really doesn't make sense and so on, Then what's next? Well, he now has no wife. And he regretted what he did. The miracle is he didn't kill Haman. But then he couldn't because God would not allow him. Because Haman had much more work to do. So what do they offer Achashverosh? They offer him a beauty contest. I want to tell you something. I have not been around royalty too much. But I tell you one thing. Kings don't get married because of beauty. They get married to alliances with other nations. This guy marries the daughter of the other king and so on and so forth. They don't get married from a beauty contest. This is American nonsense to have a beauty contest and so on, So what do they have? They're going to hold... So they hold a beauty pageant. You believe this? That's not how kings get married. It's very unusual, But they always associate, beauty, even if you want to look for a beautiful woman, you associate that with some type of political superiority, because that's what you want to do with your kingdom, and so on. So that doesn't make sense. Next miracle. Guess what? Esther wins. She wins. And I want to tell you something, there were a lot of women in that place because they really had no choice, And the Gemara says that Esther, if I recall correctly, had a green complexion. And she was an older woman. She wasn't a young woman, How did she win? Unbelievable, that she won the contest. Was that chance? Listen, look at the series of miracles that happened. Next, Mordechai is walking, and all of a sudden he has two guys, Bigsan and Seresh, plotting to kill. Wow, it's incredible. What luck that he happened to be over here, the conversation between two would-be traitors. What are the odds that he would walk by at the exact moment that these two people are plotting to kill the king? And that's how he knew. What are the odds? It's like 1 in a billion that, that he was in the right place at the right time. So that's incredible. Next idea is Haman, who gave this advice to the king to kill his wife. And he was the 7th minister. He's now Grand Vizier. Wow, what did he do to become Grand Vizier? Achashverosh should have been livid with rage at the advice of this guy, especially because he regretted it, and so on, He was the lowest advisor with terrible advice, yet he became the Grand Vizier. Right. Now, one of the incredible, I find this to be an unbelievable miracle. If somebody saves your life, what would you do? You thank him. Give them a tremendous gift because he just saved your life. Mordechai just saved the life of the king Achashverosh from Bigsan Viseresh, the two people that wanted to kill him, right? Do you know the king never wrote it down? What? You're not going to reward Mordechai for his deed, that he just saved your life? No. He never even wrote it down. It's one thing you write it down in the Chronicles and you don't reward the guy. That itself is ridiculous. He saved the king's life. How could you not reward him? But he never even wrote it down. Michigana, right? You realize what kind of miracle that is? That he saved the life of the king and never writes it down? Come on. It's incredible. But yet it happened. Okay. Then what happens, right? We come to the story, right? So then Haman makes the deal with Achashverosh and so on. And then all of a sudden, in the night before the party, with Esther and so on, right? So Achashverosh can't sleep. Okay, it's possible he can't sleep. Fine. But what happens? So the king, if you don't sleep, what do? Well, maybe you take a hot shower, or maybe you take a hot glass of milk, or maybe you pop a pill. I mean, whatever you do, you know. But one thing I tell you wouldn't do is walk over to your library and pull out the encyclopedia and start reading the encyclopedia. So what Achashverosh did was worse. He told them, get me one of the books of the Chronicles of Persia, right? I mean, this is what you do when you can't go to sleep? You read the books of Persian Chronicles? Huh? Maybe that'll put him to sleep quick, I don't know. You see? But that's what you pull out, the Chronicles of Persia? And not only that, there were many volumes. They pulled out the exact volume and they opened it up to the exact page, right? And there Taka said, Mordechai saved the life of the king. It's like it was a laser beam right at that verse, you see. So obviously later they did write it. But wait a minute. It says, so Achashverosh said, wait a minute. What did we give the guy? Because he realized. So they said nothing. You see? Which itself is incredible. To turn to the exact volume and the exact page where it says that Mordechai saved a life. You see? And nothing was done. So he wants to know. So Achashverosh has an interest. Well, I have to know what to do. Right? And all of a sudden, Vayovoy Haman. Haman walks in. Now, I don't know what time it was, but if this guy was sleeping, right, I imagine it was in the middle of the night. What in the world is Haman doing coming to Achashverosh in the middle of the night? Vayovoy Haman. Of course, he was going to tell Achashverosh that he wants to build a tree 50 amos high to kill Mordechai. You could see me, you couldn't wait till the next day? You don't do this at night, because the guy was sleeping. So I assume it was the nighttime. So why would Haman want to tell this to Achashverosh in the middle of the night? What kind of crazy hour is that to tell the king? And how did he know that the king was up altogether? You see. So this makes no sense. And then you have an incredible miracle. Another incredible miracle. What is that? You should know one thing. When kings are kings, there's only one thing that they're worried about. Do you know what that is? That somebody doesn't assassinate them to become the king. All kings are worried about that. The assassination attempts. You see. So, therefore, Haman, who's not stupid, he's aware of the fact that Achashverosh, right, is afraid that somebody may kill him. So therefore, what does Haman say? He gives him advice, right, where he thinks he's the guy that's going to have it. Well, you put the guy on a horse, you put him in king's clothing, you put a crown on his head, right? And Achashverosh looked at him and he said to himself, he's out of his mind. He wants this for himself because he doesn't know I intend to do this for Mordechai. He's obviously, because the king phrased it, what would be done to a guy that king wants to show honor? So Haman says, well, who does he want to show more honor than me? Right? And that was logical. But the last thing you want to do is give the king advice where you will be the king, which means that you're thinking of assassinating Achashverosh. How dumb can you be? You don't give the king advice which clearly indicates that you are thinking of becoming king. And the road to that is where you will be led through the streets, screaming out, this is what's done, right? Everybody's going to see that. And think about it. You're on his horse, you got his clothing, and you got the guy's crown. I mean, what does that tell us? That Haman wants to be king. Well, how do you do that? You kill Achashverosh. So why would he offer him that kind of advice? Yet that's what he did. So of course he tells him it's Mordechai, and so on. I mean, just take a look at all of these things are incredibly improbable. And then finally, when he does meet in the party with Esther and Achashverosh, and so on, all of a sudden Achashverosh walks out because Esther accuses him of wanting to kill the Jews. And guess what? The guy falls on the bed, right? That's the last place you want to be. And I think he fell on top of Esther. That's the last place you want to be when she's accusing you of treachery. And then, of course, Achashverosh walks in and he takes a look at the scene. He says, excuse me, you want to take my wife in front of me? And so on. I mean, think about the inappropriateness of the timing is incredible. It's a mess. Now we know what the Medrash says, that Gavriel, I think it was, who threw Haman on the bed, whatever, but it's an S. And then Charvoina walks in and says, by the way, he's building this tree of 50 amas. So the king, since he now has a solution, if Charvoina didn't say that, he would not have been killed. Because then the king would have thought it over the next day. And he says, okay, I need your explanation. What are you doing? And of course Haman would have explained, and so on. So he would have had a chance to cool down, you see. But since Charvoina said, by the way, you just honored a guy called Mordechai, and this guy wants to hang him up in front of the whole Shushan, So once an immediate solution presented itself, it's almost like the impetuousness said, okay, hang him, because we now have everything we need to get rid of the problem. So Achashverosh therefore never thought about it. What are you doing? You're killing your grand vizier, who just gave you 10,000 talents of silver. You see? So think about all of this, When you think about, if you add up the possibility, the probability of all these events happening, you realize that it could not have happened, really. Maybe one or two events, but not this whole series that brought salvation to the Jews. So what do we realize? That the Moshe is now going to act concealed. He's not going to save the Jews, obvious. That the Hanhoga of the Moshe is now called Hester, for whatever reason. And that's what they realize. So therefore, that has to be celebrated. What has to be celebrated? That God orchestrates everything, even if we don't see the machinations, the ongoing salvation of the Rebbeinu Shalom. And that has to be also celebrated, since the whole story of Purim occurred. And by the way, that's the reason why the name of God does not occur once, except in an allusion where Revach v'Hatzolah, salvation will come from another place. But nowhere is the Rebbeinu Shalom mentioned, which is rather bizarre, especially since Purim is one of the Chav Daled 24 books of the Bible. And the answer to that is because we don't see God anywhere in the Megillah. We just see incidents happening that the probability is absolutely incredible, you see. So Chazal therefore celebrates this with what's called costumes. Because what does the costume say? Costume is, there's you and there's your costume. You see, we recognize that there are two things here. You see, one is the person himself, and the second thing is the appearance of the person outside. So a costume conceals the fact, or it demonstrates the fact, that there's the Rebbeinu Shalom, right, who does it, and the fact that his appearance to us, however, is a costume. What is that costume called? It's called chance, right? We don't realize how many things look like chance, but they're orchestrated. It's like the guy who wanted to go, he had to go to France to sign a deal, and he makes a time, he has a place, a time, a date, and so on, and he takes the plane to Paris, gets off the plane, he taps for his the paper, and he finds that the paper's missing. He has no idea where this person that he wants to make a real deal, business deal is. So what's he going to do? And let's assume the phones are not working, so he can't call the office and so on, So what does he do? He doesn't know what to do. So he goes to a phone booth. Those days, it can be a phone booth and so on, And he calls on the phone his home to tell him that I don't know what to do. Meanwhile, he sees there's another guy next to him in a phone booth, right? Or the phones could even be open and so on. And he's mentioning, by the way, I have to meet this guy. And the other guy who came to Paris says, wait a minute, that's the exact guy I have to meet. What are the odds that he would meet the guy that knows who he has to meet at the exact time that the guy is referring to the name? There's no odds here. It's 1,000,000 to 1. What is that called? It's called chance. But who set up that chance? The Ribono Shel Olam. That was the chesed of the Ribono Shel Olam. So that's how the Ribono Shel Olam acts with us, through probability or through, the likelihood of chance and so on. And this is the way the Ribono Shel Olam relates to us and so on. In any case, so this is what we see. And the last thing, which is an important idea of Purim, is we think, if you ask some guy, who's the hero of this story? And the answer is Mordechai, right? Who's the villain? Haman. Everybody will tell you that. But you know what the answer is? There is no hero and there's no villain really, right? All of them are doing the will of God. Except Mordechai does the will of God freely, with free will. Haman does the will of God compelled. Why did the Russian compel Haman to do this? Or he brought out the guy that he knew would want to kill the Jews, because he needed the Jews to do the tikkun and recognize what the laws of the Torah really are. So he used Haman. Haman is a patsy. He doesn't realize that. So when you think about that, they're both servants of God. You see, is that Mordechai is a servant willingly through free will, so he gets reward. Haman is also a servant doing the will of God, bringing the Jews to the understanding of what the laws of Choshen Mishpat and Even Ezer really are. But that also is the will of God, except Haman is compelled to do it. You see, but really, they're both heroes in the sense that they both serve God. So we need that also to be served or to be recognized. How? That's why you have to get drunk, ad lo yoda, when you don't see the difference, right? You don't see the difference between Baruch Mordechai, blessed is Mordechai, and curses Haman, which, by the way, are the exact numerical values of each other. Baruch Mordechai and Or Haman in Gematria, in arithmetic counting, equals each other. Because really, in the end, don't fool yourself. Nobody can deviate from the will of God. Nobody can deviate from the plan of God. We don't realize how tight that plan is, right? God will not allow anybody to alter his plan. He does, allow you to think about different things you want to do, and so on. But if it's an alteration of his plan, you can't do it. Same thing. So we find Haman to be the servant of God, Just like Mordechai saved the Jews, Haman brought the Jews to an unbelievable awareness of what the Ratzon HaBoreh is, that the laws of the Torah, Ben Adam L'Chaveroi, is not just legal, and it's not just justice, tzedek. It's really a much greater madrega of righteousness, you see. And that's what the Jews failed to realize, at Matan Torah. And therefore there was a defect in the plan of creation. And Chazal realized that what was done now is not merely a salvation of the Jews. They did a tremendous tikkun of Kabbalah HaTorah. That has to be a holiday. Right. That's how they know that if the event creates a tremendous new tikkun, that has to become a yontif. But if it merely reinforces an older tikkun, you see, or repeats an older tikkun, then we may want to celebrate it, but locally. But that does not become a real holiday, you see. So that's a very important concept and so on, you see. Okay, there's obviously a great deal more to talk about and so on. I don't know, I'll see, maybe I'll give something next week. But anyway, the main idea is that we now begin to understand the greatness of Purim, that the Jews now had an understanding of the greatness of their Torah that has really nothing to do with man's service. It's all about bringing God back into creation and therefore transforming the reality of this world. So therefore you now have an understanding of Mishloach Manas to increase the Achdus, Matonis Nevyoinim, right? You have an understanding of getting drunk, Adelo Yoda, right? You have an understanding of many things, of the Seudah, the meal itself, because that is a tremendous cause for joy that we actually understand. And of course, like I say, the essence of Purim, right, is that we accept the Torah, and that's what you need to believe. The Torah that we have is not convenience. It's not legal. It doesn't serve man in the sense that, he knows exactly what to do with the laws and he could make it up himself. You can't. And that's why the Rebbeinu Shalom himself had to give the Torah, because we don't know the criteria of righteousness, really. So let's remember that what the Torah really is that it meets all our needs, specifically the need of spirituality, the need to transform this world into Ilim Haba, right? And that's why we have to be ever thankful to the Rebbeinu Shalom for giving us a device, the Torah, the mechanism, the wherewithal, the device that will allow us to change Ilim Hazeh into Ilim Haba, and so on. There's one thing I wanted to mention which is interesting. I don't know what it portends, but I don't know if you know it, but the 14th of March, right, is Purim, which is Friday. I don't know if you know it, but the 14th of March at 2:26 p.m. a.m. on Friday, which is after the Megillah of Thursday night, will be a total lunar eclipse. I do not know if you know that. Now, a total lunar eclipse on the night of Purim? Really? A total lunar eclipse is what? Is not a good siman for the Jews. And that will be on the night of Purim, right? So you have to understand, that's number one. Number two, that lunar eclipse will be called a blood moon, right? It's going to turn red. That's a blood moon. And if you look at Yoel, at the end of Yoel, it says that before the great day of redemption, I will blot out the sun and I will turn the moon red to blood. Right? Because therefore a blood moon is a sign of redemption. You see. So the fact that you have a blood moon, which is a sign of redemption, and Purim, which protects the Jews from the bad mazel of the lunar eclipse and so on, who knows? Maybe the Geula in earnest, right, will start Thursday night, which is Purim, which is interesting. And the last thing I want to tell you is this is not just an ordinary Purim. This is what's called a Purim Mishulosh. This is a 3-part Purim, which is much holier, because then there are laws of Purim which are observed Friday, Shabbos, which is Shushan Purim, and Sunday. Since Shushan Purim is Shabbos, there are laws that are observed on Sunday. So Purim is 3 days, Friday, Shabbos, Sunday. Wow. That means the holiness of that Shefa, the holiness of that Purim is going to radiate for 3 days. That's number one. It's incredible. Much greater influence. Not only that, there's a lunar eclipse, total. What are the odds? Not only that, it's a blood moon. You see? So, given the time that we are now in, when there's so much messianic events occurring, and I haven't really spoken about that and so on, who knows what this means, what can mean Thursday night. So let's hope that this portends a tremendous change in the mazel of Klal Yisrael, especially when it comes to the Arabs, the hostages, Iran, the evil of the anti-Semitism in America. Let's hope that it changes and starts to really resemble a true redemption, besides the fact that America is having a salvation, which is really very good and so on, But we need a salvation. Spirituality needs a salvation, you see. And that's why it's important to recognize Purim teaches us the unbelievable majesty and greatness of the Torah itself, both the written law and the oral law. Thank you.